Welcome to the presentation, Avatars for Positive School Climate, Narratives from Gifted Students with Disabilities and/or from Minoritized Ethnic Groups. I am Anani Vasquez, and I will be joined by Dr. Sarup Mather. The goals for this presentation are, first, to introduce role-player game characters, both the character avatars and bios, that were designed during the analysis of interviews on school climate with gifted students. In the three examples that will be introduced today, giftedness emerges as only one aspect of intersectional identities, along with disability, gender, and race. The second goal is to identify possible additional challenges for students with these identities in typical school climates. Third, I would like to consider, along with the audience, possibilities for change in school practice, especially around the use of school climate survey data and in professional development. From the literature, we know that positive school climate usually correlates with higher student achievement. Students who feel they belong, are safe, and are treated fairly are more able to focus on learning. Schools typically use surveys to evaluate school climate. Often the results are shared as school averages. These averages might or might not be disaggregated by grade level, gender, and race. But students have intersectional identities. They are more than one attribute, such as gifted or female. Because these various intersections affect social interactions and personal perspectives, every student will experience school differently, even those within the same setting. Gifted students with disabilities and/or from minoritized groups may have even more divergent school experiences when compared to students reporting in the average range. Gifted students with disabilities are also called twice exceptional students. We know that these students tend to demonstrate low self-efficacy and self-concept and require student-centered, strength-based approaches for learning along with social-emotional support. Gifted students from minoritized ethnic groups face additional social-emotional challenges. These students are more likely to face systemic discrimination, are less likely to be identified as gifted, and are often served in low SES schools. Students from low SES communities are much less likely to be identified and receive gifted services due to limited resources and/or programs. Gender also plays a role in how gifted students are perceived. For example, Black females experience education in both similar and different ways from Black males and white females, based on their intersectional identities. White females tend to experience high school success and are well represented in gifted education. The same is not true for Black females. Students who experience academic, social, emotional, or behavioral challenges at their public school might transfer to a different school or even drop out. School choice gives families options, including families with gifted students and students with disabilities. Students might leave their neighborhood public school for many reasons, including social, emotional, and economic variables, as well as academic reasons. Although school choice is not as accessible to all families, for example, because of distance and transportation issues or because of financial constraints, it does offer some possibilities. In this study, every student participant was attending a private school but had previously attended a public school.
My name is Sarup Mather. I have been working with Anani for about 2 years now, and we've been together working on this particular project. And my area is actually working with kids who have intense behavioral needs. And this was really appealing for me to know why these kids who tend to have such strong, intense behavioral needs, move out from public schools and go on to these alternative settings. And we know that they need personalized instruction because of their needs in multiple concerns that they have, like special ed concerns, mental health concerns. Many of them have gone through some very significant trauma. They have, these kind of academic behaviors, which show that they might have intellectual delays or some kind of splintered skills in math or reading. They have issues with comprehension and processing. So when they have these kind of intense issues and they don't feel connected to the environment, they drop out and they get involved with juvenile justice. And that's what we call the school to prison pipeline. So there is a relationship between this behavior, their academic performance, dropout, and then juvenile justice involvement. And it is an important question to ask why these youth really become disengaged and disconnected. And there are certain kinds of assumptions about that maybe they don't have enough role models that can support their learning. Maybe the schools have not provided them with the right kind of an emotional climate so they can feel that they belong to this place. And we find that 30 to 60% of them actually have diagnosed special ed needs. And then they also have, more than half of them have mental health concerns. So it is really important that we take the time to understand their views, listen to their voice about the climate of the public school, and find out about which conditions seem to be working for them and the ones that seem to be not working for them. So that provides a little bit of a rationale for this study.
We know positive school climate is important for school success, but we don't know much about how gifted students of color or twice exceptional students experience public school climate. Originally, the focus of this study was on school climate as perceived by twice exceptional students, but it quickly became evident that gifted students experienced divergent school experiences not only because of their giftedness or disability, but because of other intersections such as race. The research question for this study then is, how do gifted students with disabilities and/or from minoritized ethnic groups perceive public school climate? Semi-structured interviews were conducted with middle and high school students who were attending private schools at the time of the interviews, but who had previously attended a public school. Interview participants were chosen from 20 7th through 12th graders who had responded to a retrospective school climate survey. The Delaware School Climate Survey had been revised to elicit student responses about school climate at the last public school they attended. Students with divergent responses, meaning very high ratings or very low ratings to the school climate and behavioral management techniques sections of the survey, were invited to participate in the interviews. 3 students agreed to be interviewed. Field notes were kept before, during, and after the interviews, as well as memos during the analysis process. The transcripts were read and the interview audio was listened to repeatedly throughout the process. I chose to use narrative analysis for this study because narratives play a social role as stories by engaging, persuading, entertaining, misleading, and/or mobilizing an audience. Narratives do political work. Storytelling can expose injustice, affect social change, and alter professional practice. Dialogic or performative analysis is based on an understanding of narrative as interactive dialogue, in which the interviewer, interviewee, performer, audience are all involved in storying. With this perspective, narrative is an unfolding of events that are both performed or acted out with specific intents, and enactments or role-played representations by all those who are engaged. Storying is also the telling of personal experiences, as well as the composition of stories about those personal experiences, and the exploration of individual perspectives as well as the implications for a wider social context. Storying involves multiple voices, perspectives, truths, and meaning, as well as transformation. But it is less an ordering of individual voices, perspectives, truths, meanings, and transformations, and more of a collective, ecological becoming of a story. This ecologically performed storying crosses time and space. It also crosses realities. Arndt and Tessar call for narrative that moves beyond what we as humans consider the real world. Through fiction, one can experiment, play, or practice within a constructed world without concern as to whether or how the event would occur in real life. Speculative fiction, therefore, allows ideas to be considered without the limitations placed on by plausibility. In this sense, storying is about communicating ideas and critical discourse. Narrative across realities includes not only the multiple realities of human perspectives that are entangled in a given ecology, but the more than human characters and objects of related actual and virtual worlds. This theoretical framework informed the methods I chose to create role-player game characters. As I worked through the narrative analysis for the 3 interviews, certain methods or procedures emerged. My plan was to create a role-player game character with an avatar and bio that might be used later with educators in a virtual or in-person game, which might spark further discussion on the issues brought up during the interviews. The methods I used were not pre-planned, but emerged as I worked with various technology, including paper, pencil, acrylic paints, the Xbox avatar editor, Pixton storyboards or comic strips, and the Clip-to-Comic app. My final procedures included sketching the avatar while listening to the audio of the interview on loop, and adding notes to the sketch based on the audio transcripts, notes, and memos. I also began to think about a superpower that would reflect the character's story. Next, I sketched the avatar onto art paper. I then painted the avatar based on the notes from my first sketch. The avatars were not painted to represent participant likenesses, but as alternate images that connected to the participants' stories. A digital picture was taken of the final painting and altered with the realistic filter in the Clip-to-Comic app. I then used Word resume template and notes from my first sketch to create the bio. Jackie was inspired by a student that shared various stories about her last public school experience with me. Her last public school population was mostly Caucasian, and she explained that she was one of the few darker students. Race seemed to play into many of the interactions at this school. Black students were given harsher punishments than white students for similar behaviors. She was often harassed because of her race. There was an overall lack of respect for those who were different, which even extended to the way students treated teachers. For example, Spanish teachers kept leaving the school because of the student respect towards them and their culture. There were also divides in the school based on typical junior high cliques, but also between programs. There was an international baccalaureate program, honors courses, and general education courses. Everyone knew which track they were a part of, and those in general education would say that the others were receiving special attention and resources. Those in the honors classes looked down on those who were not in honors. If you were in IB or honors, you were expected to do well, whether or not you received an appropriate instruction. This student talked about how she hadn't learned to write properly, but also was not supported to learn how. She felt that some teachers were indifferent to her needs because she was a good student and gifted. The bad students got all of the attention. But she says she realizes that teachers were doing the best they could given the negative atmosphere they were working in. Through this experience, she felt she had learned to both go with the flow and to speak up for herself. Sometimes complex issues couldn't be resolved easily by going to the teacher or the principal. But sometimes a student, even a good student or a gifted student, needed to know when to ask for help. So if you see on the screen, here is Jackie's profile, which says, Jackie is a quiet, serious 10th grader who relates more easily to adults than peers. She is highly cognizant of racial inequity and segregation by social and ability groups at her school. She has learned to advocate for herself and be flexible in an ever-changing school environment. Jackie has acquired the power of electricity as she is grounded and has the ability to connect seemingly opposite groups of people to spark potential. She has not yet mastered her electrical currents, and she does not yet understand the power of potential. Her hobbies are metal jewelry making and journal writing. She's a female 10th grader, African American, white, and gifted. Her skills include flexibility, confidence, self-advocacy, and her power, or her superpower, is electricity. A couple of her challenges are making and maintaining friendships and dealing with racial harassment. Abilene was inspired by a student who had very strong feelings about various negative experiences at her last public school. She tells how the school climate of her last school changed when the principal changed. The hallways were cliquey, the teachers were stressed, and a certain group of boys seemed to control the atmosphere. They harassed the girls and were often inappropriate, such as when they would drop their basketball shorts or yank down the shorts of the girls. The teachers seemed to encourage clique creation and support the boys in their behaviors. Popular kids were allowed special treats, like having their friends get the whole cafeteria to sing happy birthday to them, while others were reprimanded for doing the same. The students with higher social status also were recognized for achievements with certificates and celebrations, and others who had made significant gains in academics or had perfect attendance were left out. This student also tells about her experiences as a student with disabilities. She shared that she was on a 504 plan for dyslexia and anxiety. She did have one teacher who respected her 504 and helped her deal with bullying and forced friendships. She said that there were a lot of special ed kids at her school and that the group of boys would make fun of them in the halls. The experiences at that school made her afraid to trust people, and she became very shy. Since moving to her new school, she has felt accepted, as the students there are like brothers and sisters. She says the experience has given her knowledge of what to look for and how to help others overcome bullying experiences. She stresses that teachers need to be caring. Students need to know that they can trust their teacher, that teachers and students should have mutual trust and patience with each other. If you look here on the slide, Abilene's profile states, Abilene is a caring, sensitive 8th grader who values mutual respect student to student and teacher-student. She's highly cognizant of gender inequality and ability and social status segregation at her school. She uses what she has learned from her personal school experiences when mentoring students who are being bullied. Abilene has acquired the power of healing, as she is a natural comforter and caregiver. She has not yet mastered the intense emotions and sensations brought about during the healing process, and can sometimes be overwhelmed or in danger of depleting her own energies. Her hobbies are caring for lost or hurt animals and gardening. Abilene is an 8th grader who self-identifies as white, gifted, with dyslexia and anxiety. Some of her skills are empathy, patience, and mentoring, and her superpower is healing. Her challenges are trusting others, having a sense of belonging, and dealing with sexual harassment. London was inspired by a student who felt that she had had a good public school experience despite some problems. She was identified as having dyslexia and as gifted in 2nd grade. Prior to receiving services, she had been unhappy and hated school. Most of her teachers had been understanding and supportive, but her 5th grade teacher would not use accommodations. That school had general education, a program for gifted students, and a program for students who needed to learn using different methods, such as hands-on or project-based. She felt that the students in these 3 programs butted heads a lot. There was also a large special education class. She was pulled out for special education and also participated in the gifted and alternate learning styles programs. While overall she felt she had had good teachers, got good grades, and felt safe and accepted at that school, she felt that there were times when the separation of programs contributed to social problems. She left that public school setting for a private school that prioritized the needs of twice exceptional students. She said the change was made because she needed more and was not getting what she needed at the last school. She also talked about a friend of hers that she felt was misunderstood and mentioned that there were troubled kids that were not having their needs met. If you look at the slide, London's profile states, London is an easygoing ally who works towards social unity at her school. She's highly cognizant of rivalry and discrimination between structured school programs that separate students by ability. While she prefers to go with the flow, she is the first to step in and diplomatically resolve conflicts between peers. London has acquired the power to control magnetic fields, as she easily attracts friends and has the ability to bring polarized individuals together. She has not yet mastered how to control the strength of her power, and sometimes might force relationships before individuals are ready. Her hobbies are stargazing and Star Wars. She's a 7th grader who self-identifies as white, gifted with dyslexia. Some of her skills are friendships, making friends, being an ally, and being composed. Her power includes magnetic field control. Some of her challenges are that she feels helpless when facing unjust systems and procedures, and she's not confident in resolving conflicts with adults. From participant stories, we can say that gifted students with intersectional identities, including twice exceptional and gifted students of color, sometimes face social, emotional, and academic challenges such as deficit-focused interactions, discrimination, and indifference, often upheld by the segregation of school programs, such as gifted, special ed, and general education, social hierarchies, and embedded school structures and policies. Some possible strategies to improve school climate for inclusivity might be to disaggregate school climate survey data by intersectional student subgroups. Rather than disaggregating by grade level, gender, or race, we need to look at gifted students of color, gifted students with disabilities, female gifted students of color, and so on. We might also learn a lot from individual student narratives. When looking at school climate data, where are those outliers? We need to follow up with those students who have indicated having either a very positive or very negative school experience. We need to hear their stories. We also need to keep in mind that school climate is not singular. Every student within a school site will experience school differently.
You heard Anani talk about these various avatars that she has developed. And now that she has developed these avatars, what are some of the ideas that we have for future? So one of them is to use these avatars for creating a role play game that can be used for capacity building and professional development of teachers. And through these avatars, then teachers can be exposed to a variety of situations, various contexts, and understand how these issues tend to emerge, what kind of responsiveness we need to have as a teacher, as an administrator, to create an emotional climate surrounding those issues. In order to start this process, it would be important to use these avatars to understand and identify the context and these students. And in terms of the conditions, we can identify what is actually missing, what we need to take into consideration in terms of an opportunity, how all these things need to be handled. And through these simulated environments, using these avatars, we can bring in some very valuable aspects to increase their understanding about these issues. Things can be brought into this forefront and come up, and teachers can come up with a lot of alternatives and solutions, and what different ways they can actually address those difficult situations. So it's a great way to actually prepare teachers and for future difficult situations. The other aspect is that Anani would like to extend it to include youth who are justice involved, because it is important to know how they have viewed their public school environment, because they obviously were they decided to drop out, or they decided to engage in some kind of a negative behavior. The issue that we are encountering with this particular study is that the IRB is really, really challenging. And we need to really still go ahead with this particular study. We want to really mitigate against this perceptual bias that these youth are bad, and they have just done some bad, they have actually implemented some bad decisions. But many of them actually demonstrate very, very high and superior intellectual capacity for high performance, and we need to capitalize on that as well. So it is possible for them to be to remain undetected in their public school setting, and probably they didn't get the opportunity to their creative side of behaviors. So when we would ask them, we might be able to highlight some of the things that we need to be attending to and understand, so that we can address these in a better way.
As you can see, the role player game avatar development discussed here is only the beginning. We hope, though, that these stories and possibilities for school climate change have been generative for your thinking and planning as you return to your teaching context. Thank you for viewing our presentation. Please leave comments or questions. We would love to continue this conversation asynchronously.